On April 19, 1945, tanks from the 713th Tank Battalion advanced toward Kakaza Ridge on Okinawa for their first combat action. The unit had trained for months, converting 54 M4 Sherman tanks into flamethrower variants at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. They had crossed the Pacific awaiting this moment. Now they would learn what Japanese defenders had mastered in countering flame tanks. The interior of a flame tank was overwhelming. Diesel exhaust, hydraulic fluid, sweat, and the sharp chemical odor of napalm blended inside the hull. Temperatures climbed above 100 degrees even with hatches sealed. Crewmen felt sweat stream down their backs, soaking undershirts and collecting at their waists. Hands clenched controls, knuckles pale against hot steel. Through narrow vision ports, crews watched cave entrances vanish behind walls of orange fire. The napalm adhered to stone, vegetation, and anything it touched. It burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. It devoured oxygen and generated its own microclimate, drawing air inward and forcing superheated gases deep into tunnel systems. The tanks were part of an armored maneuver intended to outflank Japanese defenses along the ridge. The plan called for them to swing around Kakaza's left flank, link up with infantry on the far side, and eliminate enemy positions together. The infantry never arrived. Japanese machine guns and mortars drove back the American foot soldiers, leaving the tanks isolated. That isolation was exactly what the Japanese sought. Their doctrine, Nikohaku Kogiki, the human bullet attack, was simple: one soldier, one tank. Japanese defenders recognized that fire was destroying their positions faster than any other American weapon, so they adopted the only countermeasure available: suicide attacks. Throughout the day, Japanese assault teams struck the exposed tanks with 22-pound satchel charges. Soldiers hidden in spider holes waited until tanks passed, then rose to attack from the rear. Others hurled explosives onto engine decks or shoved them beneath hull openings. By afternoon, 6 tanks had been destroyed. 4 were flame tanks. It was the worst single-day loss of American armor on Okinawa. Crews who survived disabled vehicles often met horrific ends. Japanese soldiers pried open turret hatches and tossed grenades inside. Of the 30 tanks that maneuvered around Kakaza Ridge that morning, only 8 returned to American lines. The survivors learned a lesson that shaped the remainder of the campaign. Flame tanks required constant infantry protection. Without it, they were vulnerable to men willing to die. The Japanese understood this better than anyone. They had observed flame tanks since Saipan, studying their strengths and weaknesses. By the time the 713th arrived on Okinawa, Japanese commanders had refined specific tactics to destroy the weapons they feared most. The challenge American forces faced in the Pacific differed entirely from Europe. German troops fought from bunkers and fortifications, but surrendered when positions became untenable. Japanese soldiers did not surrender. They fought until death. They concealed themselves in caves carved from volcanic rock and coral limestone, linking them with tunnel networks extending hundreds of feet underground. They installed steel blast doors capable of withstanding direct naval gunfire. Machine guns and artillery were placed in overlapping fields of fire designed to shred infantry assaults. Conventional weapons were ineffective against such defenses. On Tarawa in November 1943, Marines learned that 3 days of naval bombardment had barely damaged Japanese fortifications. Concrete bunkers stood intact. Reinforced pillboxes remained lethal. Machine gun nests hidden in palm log emplacements cut down Marines by the hundreds as they waded ashore. Casualties from 76 hours of combat exceeded 3,000 Americans killed or wounded. Nearly the entire Japanese garrison of 5,000 died. The issue at Tarawa was not insufficient firepower. Battleships had fired 14-inch shells. Carrier aircraft had dropped hundreds of tons of bombs. But the Japanese had prepared. They built defenses from coconut logs, coral rock, and reinforced concrete. They buried bunkers beneath layers of earth that absorbed blast effects. When Marines landed, the defenders emerged and manned their weapons. From Tarawa, Marines learned a critical truth. Bullets could not penetrate fortified positions. Grenades could not reach deep cave networks. Bazookas could not collapse reinforced concrete. Fire could. Fire consumed oxygen inside enclosed spaces. Fire followed tunnel curves into chambers no other weapon could reach. Fire forced defenders to flee or die where they hid. The first American flamethrowers in the Pacific were portable units carried on a soldier's back. The M2 weighed 68 pounds when loaded with 4.5 gallons of fuel. It projected flame about 40 feet. It was devastating against bunkers and cave entrances. Marines valued it. Japanese soldiers feared it above all other infantry weapons. Medical reports documented the effects. Those hit directly by flame died within seconds, lungs seared by superheated air before burning began. Those in enclosed spaces died from oxygen depletion and carbon monoxide poisoning without direct flame contact. A single burst into a bunker could kill every occupant without leaving obvious burns. Naval medical officers examining bodies after Saipan found victims with no external burns who had died from respiratory failure. The flames had consumed oxygen and filled confined spaces with toxic gases. Death came quickly. The weapon was terrifyingly effective, but its operator faced grim odds. The average life expectancy of a Marine flamethrower operator was about 4 minutes. The bright flame made him an immediate target. Fuel tanks on his back could ignite if struck. The limited range forced him dangerously close to enemy positions. Most operators did not survive their first engagement. Casualty rates exceeded 90% in some units. The solution seemed clear. Mount the flamethrower on a tank. Colonel George F. Young-Macht was Chief Chemical Officer for the Central Pacific in 1944. Working from Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. His responsibilities included chemical weapons, gas defense, and incendiary warfare. Born in 1887 in Dubuque, Iowa, Young-Macht enlisted in the Iowa National Guard at 16 and built a career in chemical warfare. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, he was among the first officers directing gas mask distribution amid fears of chemical attacks. In May 1944, the Navy delivered 5 Mark I flamethrowers deemed unsuitable for shipboard use. They were too heavy. Young-Macht saw opportunity. Mounted on armored vehicles, they could solve the vulnerability of portable flamethrowers. With help from the 170th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, he assembled a top-secret composite unit to develop tank-mounted flamethrowers. Personnel came from the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company, the 5th Marine Tank Battalion, and the Seabees. The work was dangerous and unglamorous. Engineers designed mounts that could survive combat. They created fuel systems that would not fail under stress. They devised protections for crews if systems malfunctioned. Each conversion required 1,200 man-hours. Welders worked non-stop. Electricians rewired over 1,000 connections per vehicle. Machinists fabricated 150 custom components per tank. The 75mm gun was removed and replaced by the flamethrower tube. Crews were reduced to 4 men since no loader was needed. Machinists mate 2nd Class A. Wright and electricians mate 2nd Class Joseph Klee worked on early designs. They found the Army's original concepts overly complex. The Seabees simplified the systems, improving reliability and field maintenance. The first prototype was an M3 Steward light tank fitted with a Ronson flamethrower. They named it Satan. Its fuel capacity was limited. Range was only marginally better than portable units. But it worked. A flamethrower protected by armor could approach Japanese positions and survive long enough to burn them out. The first Satan was christened Hells of Fire. Unmarked personally supervised its testing, watching as streams of flame shot from the turret and engulfed target structures. The heat was intense even from 50 yards away. Men watching the demonstration understood instantly why this weapon would terrify defenders in fortified positions. For the Marianas Campaign in June 1944, Young-Macht's team converted 24 cubic meters light tanks into Satans. They were sent to Saipan and Tainan. The results exceeded expectations. On Saipan, flame tanks proved essential for clearing the island's countless cave positions. Marines who had watched friends die attacking fortified positions now watched Japanese soldiers run screaming from caves as liquid fire poured inside. The tanks operated in coordination with infantry assault teams. Standard gun tanks provided covering fire and engaged any anti-tank weapons. The flame tanks approached to within range of the target position. Typically 100 to 150 feet. Infantry provided close protection against suicide attackers. When all elements were in position, the flame tank fired. The effect was devastating. Japanese defenders who had survived naval bombardment, artillery barges, and infantry assault could not survive the flames. Those who tried to remain in their positions died from asphyxiation or burns. Those who fled were cut down by waiting riflemen. Either way, positions that had cost Marine lives to assault conventionally fell quickly when flame tanks were available. A 1st Marine Division history recorded the impact plainly. The flame tank was the one weapon that caused the Japanese to leave their caves and rock crevices and run. The Japanese noticed. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito commanded the Japanese garrison on Saipan. By early July 1944, American forces had pushed his remaining troops into the northern corner of the island. Zippo understood that continued conventional defense was impossible. The flame tanks had burned through position after position. On July 6, Zippo issued his final order. All remaining Japanese forces would conduct Gyokasai, Shattered Jewel, a mass suicide attack intended to die, inflicting maximum casualties on the enemy. It was the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War. Nearly 4,000 Japanese soldiers assembled near Makuna village. Many carried rifles. Some carried only bamboo spears with bayonets lashed to the ends. Wounded men hobbled forward with grenades tied to poles. At 4:45 on the morning of July 7, they struck the American lines between the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105 Infantry Regiment. The attack lasted 15 hours. Japanese soldiers overran aid stations, artillery positions, and command posts. They fought with bayonets, swords, and bare hands when ammunition ran out. American machine guns cut them down by the hundreds, but still they came. When it ended, almost every Japanese participant was dead. American casualties reached approximately 900. Killed and wounded. Lieutenant General Solito had committed seppuku the night before, disembowelling himself with his sword rather than witness the final destruction of his command. But the Gyosai at Saipan was not primarily an attack against flame tanks. It was a last desperate attempt to die with honor before annihilation. The Japanese military had not yet developed specific tactics for destroying the armored flamethrowers. That would come later as the flames spread across the Pacific. The true evolution of Japanese anti-lane tank tactics began at Peleliu in September 1944. Colonel Kuno Nakagawa commanded approximately 11,000 Japanese defenders on an island 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. Unlike previous commanders, Nakagawa rejected the traditional strategy of defending beaches and conducting Banzai charges when positions became untenable. Instead, he ordered his men to dig in and fight a war of attrition. Nakagawa understood something his predecessors had missed. The Americans expected Banzai charges. They prepared for them with interlocking fields of machine gun fire and artillery concentrations. Mass attacks into those kill zones accomplished nothing except the rapid destruction of Japanese forces. But if defenders remained in their fortified positions and forced the Americans to come to them, every yard of advance would cost American blood. The Umar Brobel Mountain, which Americans would call Bloody Nose Ridge, contained more than 500 natural limestone caves. Japanese engineers connected them with tunnels, installed sliding steel doors over entrances, and modified openings to defend against grenades and flamethrowers. They angled cave mouths so that direct fire could not penetrate. They created multiple exits so that defenders could escape when one entrance was compromised. The defensive preparations were remarkable in their thoroughness. Mine shafts left over from pre-war phosphate mining operations were converted into ammunition storage and command facilities. Some cave complexes extended hundreds of feet underground with multiple levels connected by staircases cut into the rock. Ventilation shafts provided fresh air. Electric lighting powered by generators allowed troops to operate in total darkness. Concrete, reinforced positions housed artillery pieces that could be wheeled forward to fire through ports, then withdrawn into protective cover. The terrain was nightmarish for attackers. Jagged coral ridges rose at steep angles covered with dense vegetation that concealed defensive positions. Ravines channeled advancing troops into kill zones. The heat was brutal, often exceeding 100 degrees. Fresh water was scarce and everywhere. From every ridge and ravine and cave mouth, Japanese machine guns and mortars waited. The 1st Marine Division landed on September 15, 1944. Major General William Rupertus predicted the island would fall within 4 days. He was wrong by more than 2 months. Initial progress was rapid. Marines captured the airfield on the first day and pushed inland against light resistance. But when they reached the Bragal, the advance ground to a halt. Colonel Louis Chesty Puller led his 1st Marines into the ridges, expecting to break through Japanese defenses as they had elsewhere. Instead, his regiment was systematically destroyed. Puller's 1st Marines suffered 70% casualties, 1749. men before being pulled off the line. The regiment was combat ineffective. Flame tanks arrived at Pellew. Colonel Harold Bucky Harris of the 5th Marines adopted siege tactics using bulldozers and flamethrower tanks to methodically destroy Japanese positions. The process was slow, brutal, and effective. Cave by cave, tunnel by tunnel, the Americans burned their way into the Umemeral. The flame tanks worked forward with infantry escort, approaching cave entrances and pouring fire inside. Some caves required multiple attacks as defenders retreated deeper into tunnel networks only to emerge from alternate exits and resume fighting. Bulldozers pushed earth and rubble over cave mouths. The process consumed weeks, then months. Colonel Nakagawa sent a final message on November 24. He reported burning his regimental colors and dividing his remaining 56 men into groups with orders to attack the enemy wherever they found them. That night, 25 Japanese were killed attempting to infiltrate American lines. The following morning, prisoners confirmed that Nakagawa and Major General Kenjiro Marai had both committed ritual suicide in their command post. But Nakagawa's men had learned valuable lessons before dying. They observed that flame tanks operated most effectively when infantry accompanied them closely. The escorting soldiers protected the tanks from close assault while the tanks burned fortified positions. Separate them and the tanks became vulnerable. Japanese doctrine evolved. The Imperial Army developed a three-stage approach to defeating American armor. First, use anti-tank guns to destroy tanks at range if possible. The Type 9747mm anti-tank gun could penetrate Sherman armor at 800 yards, but flame tanks were priority targets. Knock out the flame tanks first, then deal with the gun tanks. Second, use small arms and mortars to drive away the escorting infantry. Strip the tanks of their eyes. American tank crews had limited visibility from inside their vehicles. Without infantry to warn them of approaching threats, they were vulnerable to close assault. Japanese doctrine emphasized that the attackers should try to remain concealed until the first volley of small arms had driven off American infantry, then assault the tank. Third, attack the blinded tanks. With hand-carried explosives, destroy them, or at least immobilize them. Even if the attackers died, the loss of one flame tank was worth many soldiers' lives if it meant their comrades could survive another day inside their caves. Instructors drilled this principle into volunteers. One tank destroyed meant dozens of lives saved. The weapons developed for this purpose ranged from improvised to manufactured. Satchel charges could be thrown onto tank engine decks or shoved beneath tracks. Magnetic mines could be attached directly to hull armor. Molotov cocktails could ignite fuel and ammunition if they found gaps in armor protection. But the most terrifying weapon was the lunge mine. The Shiatsu Bakurai was a conical-shaped charge mounted on a 2M wooden pole. The explosive weighed approximately 3 kilograms and could penetrate 150 millimeters of armor at perpendicular impact. 3 metal prongs on the base ensured proper standoff distance for maximum penetration. The total weapon weighed about 14 pounds and measured 78 in length, including the 59 inches wooden handle. The weapon was officially adopted by the Japanese Army in 1944 with first combat use at Lee in the Philippines in December of that year. A captured Japanese document dated December 13, 1944 confirmed its deployment. American intelligence analyzed the weapon and characterized it as perhaps the oddest of the Japanese anti-tank charges. To use the lunge mine, a soldier removed the safety pin while approaching the target tank. He held the pole with both hands, explosive tip forward, and charged. When the prong struck armor, the handle slid forward into the housing, triggering the detonator. The resulting explosion killed the user instantly while hopefully destroying or disabling the tank. Reports noted that all attempts by Japanese soldiers to use the lunge mine against American tanks had met with failure in early encounters. American tankers learned to spray likely ambush points with machine gun fire. Infantry accompanying the tanks scouted ahead and protected flanks, but the reports were not entirely accurate. Lunge mine attacks did occasionally succeed, particularly against flame tanks that approached close to cave entrances and ridge positions. The close range required for flamethrower operations meant flame tanks frequently entered the effective range of suicide attackers who had learned patience and concealment. On Uema in February 1945, Colonel Unmark's team had located only 8 M43 Sherman tanks for conversion to flamethrowers. Navy CBS worked frantically to combine the best elements from 3 different flame units into what they designated the CBH-1. The installation required 150 of welding rod and 1,100 electrical connections. Each conversion cost between $20,000 and $25,000. The new design was superior to the light tank Satans used on Saipan. The Sherman's heavier armor provided better crew protection. The larger fuel capacity allowed extended operations. The improved flamethrower system operated at 300 pounds per square in pressure, giving an effective range of 400 feet with traverse capability of 270 degrees. 8 tanks for an island defended by 21,000 Japanese soldiers dug into 11 miles of tunnel and hundreds of interconnected bunkers. General Tadamaki Kurabayashi had prepared Iwo with meticulous care. He understood that the Americans would eventually take the island regardless of how he defended it. His goal was not victory. His goal was to inflict maximum casualties and buy time for the defense of the homeland. Every American Marine who died on Iwo was one less who would invade Japan itself. The defensive network was extraordinary. Volcanic rock provided natural fortification. Engineers had expanded natural caves and created new ones, connecting them with tunnels that ran beneath the entire island. Some tunnel complexes reached depths of 75 feet beyond the reach of any bomb or shell. Concrete reinforced positions housed artillery pieces, machine guns, and mortars positioned for interlocking fire coverage. Kuribayashi explicitly forbade traditional bonsai charges. The master attacks wasted lives without achieving significant results. Instead, he ordered his men to make the Americans pay for every yard with blood. Fight from the tunnels. Die in the caves. Kill 10 Americans before you die. His defensive preparations included angling cave entrances to prevent direct flame attack. He ordered construction of multiple tunnel exits so men could escape when one entrance was compromised. He positioned machine guns specifically to target flamethrower operators. Despite these preparations, the flame tanks burned through his defenses. The 8 flame tanks landed with the assault waves. They proved devastatingly effective. Marine reports noted that the flame tank was probably the most valuable single weapon employed at Iwo. The 4th Tank Battalion reported high success. The 5th Tank Battalion reported that the new flame tank was an extremely effective piece of equipment. One regimental combat team stated that tanks were probably the most valuable single type of armament in the operation, with flame tanks being more useful than standard gun tanks, especially in the rugged northern areas of the island. Marines developed assault techniques that became standard doctrine. A flame tank would approach a suspected cave position and fire sustained bursts into the entrance. Infantry would watch for defenders fleeing through alternate exits and shoot them down. Engineers would then move forward with satchel charges and explosives, sealing the cave permanently. The process was systematic and merciless. Sometimes they could hear screaming from inside. Sometimes they heard nothing at all. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams carried a portable flamethrower on Iwo. He was 5 feet 6 inches in tall, the youngest of 11 children of a dairy farmer from West Virginia. On February 23, Williams single-handedly assaulted a series of Japanese pillboxes that had stalled his company's advance. For 4 hours, he worked forward under constant fire, burning out position after position while only 4 riflemen provided cover. 2 of those riflemen were killed during the assault. Williams returned to his lines 5 times to refuel his 70-pound flamethrower. He neutralized 7 concrete pillboxes, crawling close enough to insert the flamethrower nozzle through the apertures. Japanese soldiers emerged from their positions with bayonets fixed, determined to stop him. He saw them coming and pulled both triggers on his weapon. They died in the flames. Williams received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman on October 5, 1945 for his actions that day. He passed away on June 29, 2022 as the last living World War II Medal of Honor recipient. But Williams was unusual. Most flamethrower operators did not survive sustained combat. The flame tanks provided the same capability with far greater survivability. Marines learned to wait for flame tank support before assaulting particularly difficult positions. They would hold Their advance until a flame tank could be brought forward, then follow the burning path it carved through Japanese defenses. The Japanese defenders responded with desperate measures. Officers organized nighttime raids, specifically targeting the precious flame tanks. Small groups infiltrated American lines under cover of darkness, seeking out the distinctive Sherman silhouettes in assembly areas. Others waited in prepared positions along routes the tanks were likely to travel the following day. Day after day, the flame tanks consumed 10,000 gallons of napalm. They burned bunkers. They incinerated cave complexes. They forced Japanese soldiers out of positions that had survived naval bombardment and aerial attack. When the battle ended, after 36 days, nearly 7,000 Americans had died. Japanese deaths numbered approximately 20,000. Captain Frank C. Caldwell, a company commander with the 26th Marines, summarized the campaign clearly. "In my view, it was the flame tank more than any other supporting arm that won this battle. The Japanese survivors of WWII carried the lessons home. The flame tanks had to be stopped. Okinawa would be the proving ground." Lieutenant General Mitsuru Oshima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa. He had studied the failures at Saipan, Peleliu, and WWII. He understood that beach defense was futile against American naval firepower. He recognized that the only viable strategy was defense in depth, forcing the Americans to pay for every ridge and cave with blood. Oshima was a professional soldier who had commanded forces in China and Burma. He had seen what American firepower could accomplish. Unlike some Japanese commanders who believed spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage, Oshima was a realist. He prepared his defenses accordingly. The Sri Line was his masterpiece. Named for Sri Castle at its center, the defensive network stretched across the southern portion of Okinawa. It incorporated natural terrain features, reinforced concrete pillboxes, interlocking fields of artillery fire, and hundreds of cave complexes connected by tunnels. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commanding the American 10th Army, later described it as arguably the most formidable defensive position ever encountered by Americans on any of the Pacific Islands. The statistics were staggering. The Japanese had constructed over 60 miles of tunnel beneath the ridges. Some tunnel complexes extended to depths of 100 feet or more, completely immune to bombardment. Artillery positions were dug into reverse slopes where naval gunfire could not reach them. Machine gun positions covered every approach, with overlapping fields of fire. For this campaign, the Army decided that an entire tank battalion would convert to flame. The 713 Tank Battalion was created from the 3rd Battalion 42nd Armored Regiment of the 11th Armored Division. The regiment had been organized on August 15, 1942 at Camp Polk, Louisiana, while the rest of the division deployed to Europe. The 713 headed for the Pacific. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas L. M. Craw of Arlington, Virginia commanded the battalion. On November 10, 1944, he received orders to convert all 54 of his M4 Sherman tanks to flamethrowers. This would be the first and only tank battalion in the world equipped entirely with flame tanks. At Schofield Barracks, CBS supervised the conversion using Canadian Ronson systems. 3 officers and 60 enlisted men from the battalion worked alongside the CBS, learning maintenance procedures and operational techniques. The Ronson flamethrowers had shorter range than the CBH-1 used at Iwama, approximately 80 to 100 yards compared to 120 to 150 yards for the Hawaiian design systems, but they were available in quantity. The first converted tank arrived on December 25, Christmas Day. All 54 were completed by January 25, 1945. The battalion trained intensively during the conversion process. Colonel Unmuck's Chemical Warfare Service personnel conducted comprehensive 40-hour courses on flame tank operation, maintenance, and tactical employment. Crews learned to coordinate with infantry escort. They practiced approaching fortified positions. They trained on fuel management, target selection, and withdrawal procedures. The hose extension was a particular innovation. allowing operators to reach pockets of defenders that could not be flamed directly. Navy fire hose in 50 feet. Lengths gave tanks up to 400 feet of reach. The battalion departed Pearl Harbor on March 4, 1945 aboard 10 landing ships. Crucial items of ammunition, fuel, rations, and supplies were divided among the ships to ensure that the loss of any single vessel would not the unit. One tank was lost when it drove into a hole on the reef during unloading and was deemed unrecoverable. The battalion would begin the campaign with 53 flamethrower tanks. The 713 was in action continuously from April 7 to June 30, 1945. 85 consecutive days of combat. Its mission was to support both Army and Marine Corps infantry in assaulting the Shuri Line. Each company of tanks would be park-led out to frontline units as needed. WWII had organized independent anti-tank companies specifically for suicide missions against American armor. These units were formed from volunteers who understood they were not expected to survive. They were taught to embrace death as the highest form of service to the Emperor. Their training emphasized a specific sequence: drive off the infantry with small arms and mortars, leave the tanks blind, then attack with explosives. The volunteers came from units that had seen what flame tanks could do. They had watched flames pour into caves where their comrades were hiding. These men understood that death by fire was terrible beyond description, and they were willing to die to prevent it from happening to others. Japanese soldiers wrote final letters to their families before suicide missions. They performed purification rituals. They made peace with death before they went to die. Some of those letters survive, preserved in museum collections. They speak of duty and honor, of love for family and homeland, of acceptance of fate. They do not speak of fear, though the fear must have been overwhelming. The tactics had evolved significantly since Saipan. Japanese soldiers no longer charged blindly at tanks in the open. Instead, they concealed themselves in fighting positions along likely tank approaches. They waited until American infantry moved forward past their positions. Then they emerged from spider holes and concealed entrances to attack the tanks from behind or from the flanks. Concealment was essential. A soldier would dig a shallow hole just deep enough to lie flat with minimal profile. He would cover himself with vegetation, rocks, or dirt, until he was invisible from more than a few feet away. He would remain motionless for hours, sometimes days, waiting for a tank to approach within striking distance. He would control his breathing, ignore thirst and hunger, suppress every natural instinct to move or adjust position. Some soldiers concealed themselves in spider holes directly in the path of advancing flame tanks. When a tank rolled overhead, the soldier would rise, detonate explosives, and die while attempting to destroy the vehicle. Others waited in bottle-shaped holes that allowed them to stand upright, but remain invisible until the moment of attack. When the moment came, the attacker would have only seconds to act, rise from concealment, pull the fuse or igniter, close the distance, deliver the charge. The explosion would kill him. If he was lucky, it would destroy the tank as well. The satchel charge was the most common weapon, a cloth bag filled with explosives and fitted with a short fuse. It could be thrown onto the engine deck where the armor was thinnest. Alternatively, a soldier could dash beneath a tank and place the charge against the belly armor before detonating it. Either method usually killed the attacker, but both could disable or destroy a tank. Japanese engineers studied captured American tanks to identify their weakest points. They learned that the Sherman's engine deck was vulnerable to concentrated explosive attack. They discovered that the tracks and suspension could be destroyed by charges placed against the road wheels. They found that ammunition stored in certain locations could be detonated by explosives placed against the hull. The Type 99 magnetic demolition charge was particularly feared by American tank crews. It consisted of 8 separate sticks of TNT assembled in a circle with 4 powerful magnets attached by canvas ribbon. The total weight was approximately 43 ounces with 26 ounces of explosive. A soldier would approach a tank from a blind spot, slap the charge against the hull, and retreat if possible or detonate in place if not. The charge could penetrate 3/4 of an inch of armor when used singly or 1/4 when 2 charges were stacked together. This was sufficient to breach the Sherman's thinner armor on the engine deck, belly plate, or rear. A 5 to 10 second time delay fuse gave the attacker a chance to escape, but many chose to remain and ensure the charge detonated against a vital point. Other soldiers attacked with Molotov cocktails, hoping to ignite fuel or ammunition through vision slits or ventilation openings. Some carried nothing but hand grenades, attempting to overwhelm crews by sheer numbers. Officers led groups in coordinated attacks, sacrificing themselves to ensure at least one man reached the target. The flame tanks presented a particularly difficult problem for Japanese defenders, but also the greatest opportunity. Their crews understood the danger they faced and developed countermeasures. Infantry escort remained close at all times. Before approaching Japanese positions, tankers sprayed likely ambush points with machine gun fire or flame. They coordinated closely with artillery and mortar teams to suppress enemy movement, but the nature of flamethrower operations required the tanks to approach close to targets. The effective range of the Ronson system was approximately 80 to 100 yards, but for maximum effectiveness against cave entrances, much closer ranges were necessary. This brought the flame tanks within the kill zone of suicide attackers. The attack at Kakaza Ridge on April 19 demonstrated the vulnerability perfectly. When infantry support failed to materialize, Japanese suicide squads destroyed tank after tank. Crews who survived their vehicles being disabled often faced worse fates. Japanese soldiers forced turret lids open and threw in grenades, killing men trapped inside. The battalion adapted. Strategies evolved through brutal experience. Flame tanks remained in forward staging areas until summoned by platoon leaders. They advanced alongside conventional tanks and infantry only when all units could move in unison. The infantry stayed close at all times, watching for suicide attackers while the flame tanks incinerated Japanese positions. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, commanding the American 10th Army, described the tactics as blowtorch and corkscrew. The blowtorch was the flame tank projecting napalm mixture into caves where it adhered to everything it touched. The corkscrew was explosive charges planted to collapse the caves and seal them permanently. Together, they eliminated Japanese positions systematically. The commanding general of the 7th Infantry Division reported to Colonel Unmac one incident where a captain and sergeant, under covering fire, reached the top of a ridge with a hose extension and killed hundreds of Japanese soldiers with the lethal flame. The hose extension proved crucial for reaching defenders that could not be burned directly from the tank's position. Flamethrower tanks were employed to clear forward and reverse slopes of hills and escarpments, destroy foxholes and bottle-shaped spider holes dug into the ground, as well as caves and ruins of structures. The 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company had developed a stabilized flamethrower fuel, napalm, and oversaw the construction of a processing plant that produced over 250,000 gallons for the campaign. This pattern repeated across Okinawa throughout the spring of 1945. The 713th Tank Battalion killed 4,788 Japanese soldiers and captured 49 during the campaign. They burned out hundreds of caves and fortified positions. Battalion losses were relatively light given the intensity of combat. 8 men were killed or missing, 111 were wounded. Enemy anti-tank fire and mines destroyed 16 of the battalion's tanks, while another 25 were classified as operational losses. Of the 41 total knocked out, 26 were repaired and returned to duty. By the final day of operations, June 30th, the battalion had 37 operational tanks. The ingenuity and labor of mechanics kept the unit at over 70% strength after nearly 3 months of continuous combat, a remarkable achievement considering no replacement flame tanks existed in the theater. The battalion consumed over 200,000 gallons of napalm and received a Presidential Unit Citation for their actions. Company B earned 2 additional Presidential Unit Citations from the Navy for operations with Marine divisions. Buckner did not survive to witness the campaign's conclusion. On June 18, 1945, he was observing frontline operations near Abaro Ridge when Japanese artillery struck. A 47mm shell hit a nearby coral outcropping, and fragments pierced his chest. He died 10 minutes later, becoming the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire during the war. The Japanese commander, General Ashima, committed seppuku on June 22, joined by his chief of staff, General Isamu Cho. The battle for Okinawa was officially declared over the following day. The casualty numbers were staggering. American ground forces suffered roughly 49,000 killed, wounded, or missing, including 12,520 killed or missing in action. The Navy lost an additional 5,000 dead and 4,900 wounded to kamikaze attacks and conventional airstrikes. Japanese military deaths exceeded 107,000, with an estimated 23,000 entombed in caves and never recovered. Approximately 140,000 Okinawan civilians perished, nearly 20% of the island's population. The battle lasted 82 days, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War, involving over 180,000 American combat troops. Each day brought new horrors. Kamikaze attacks sank or damaged hundreds of ships. The destroyer USS Laffey earned the nickname the ship that would not die after surviving attacks from 25 enemy aircraft. Infantry fought for yards of ground identified only by numbers or grim nicknames: Sugarloaf Hill, Hacksaw Ridge, Shuri Castle, each a killing zone where men died by the dozens for positions measured in feet. Flame tanks proved their value beyond doubt. They could reach the deepest caves and either drive defenders out or incinerate them where they hid. According to troops on Okinawa, the armored flamethrowers' primary value was forcing Japanese soldiers from fortified positions into the open, or supporting infantry could eliminate them. American commanders stated unequivocally that flame tanks saved lives. The psychological impact was mutual. American troops relied on flame tanks, sometimes refusing to advance against fortified positions without armored fire support. Japanese defenders came to fear the sound of Sherman engines, the scent of napalm, and the roar of flame. Some abandoned positions at the mere approach of a flame tank. Others waited in caves with explosives, determined to destroy the machines with themselves. Yet the Japanese response proved deadly in its own way. Suicide attacks slowed the American advance and destroyed irreplaceable equipment. Each lost tank represented not only the vehicle but also the trained crew, specialized fuel, parts, and the coordination with infantry developed through bloody experience. Both sides were trapped in a cycle of escalation that led only to more death. Americans developed weapons to burn defenders out of fortified positions, while the Japanese responded with suicide attacks. Americans refined tactics and produced more flame tanks. Japanese organized specialized suicide units and distributed more explosives. The cycle ended only when the war itself concluded. After Okinawa, planning began for the invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, which would require thousands of tanks and hundreds of thousands of troops. Planners projected casualties in the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Some estimates suggested American deaths alone could exceed 500,000. Flame tanks were deemed essential. Military assessments from Okinawa showed that flamethrowers could neutralize defenses that no other weapon could breach, forcing an enemy that refused surrender either to flee or die, saving countless American lives by eliminating positions that otherwise would have required costly infantry assaults. The Japanese prepared for their own response. Suicide tactics developed in island campaigns would expand nationwide, mobilizing men, women, and children with bamboo spears, explosives, or any available weapons. The doctrine was clear: the nation would resist to the last. Under Secretary of War Robert Patterson expedited Colonel Unmack's production of flame tanks. In June 1945, all further production of standard M4 Shermans was cancelled, prompting Patterson to intervene directly. The flame tank project received AAA procurement priority, the highest emergency rating in the War Production Board system, equivalent to the B-29 bomber and the atomic bomb. The Marine Corps ordered 72 additional flame tanks. By VJ Day, Unmack's crews had 70 ready for shipment. In total, the CBS at Schofield Barracks produced 354 flame tanks during the war. The CBS crews labored continuously, understanding that each completed tank could save dozens of American lives. They fabricated parts, welded armor, installed flamethrowers, and tested systems with consistent dedication. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rendered the invasion unnecessary. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. Colonel George F. Unmack remained in Hawaii after the war as chief chemical officer until his death in January 1954 at Tripler Army Hospital. He was buried with full military honors at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific and posthumously inducted into the U.S. Army Chemical Corps Hall of Fame in 1995. The weapons his team created set the standard for American mechanized flamethrower operations through the Korean War. When Communist forces invaded South Korea in June 1950, the Marine Corps assembled a platoon of 9 flame tanks from survivors of Unmack's wartime production. The CWSPH-5 tanks received during World War II. Named the Flame Dragons, they formed a platoon attached to headquarters, 1st Tank Battalion, and landed at Incheon in September 1950 during the second wave on Woolmedo Island, participating in the First Battle of Seoul. North Korean soldiers attacked American tanks with satchel charges strapped to their bodies, demonstrating that Pacific War tactics were still effective. The Flame Dragons burned enemy positions just as their predecessors had done on Okinawa 5 years earlier. A superior design, the M67, based on the M48 Patton tank, replaced the Shermans in 1955. The United States continued to use flamethrower tanks through the Vietnam War, where M67 Zippos burned enemy positions in jungles and villages. In 1978, the Department of Defense ceased flamethrower use due to public opposition. No treaty mandated this. The United States voluntarily ended a weapon that had been devastating for 3 decades. Vietnam marked the final American combat use of flamethrowers, with the M9-7 as the last infantry model. The Okinawan caves are quiet today. The ridges where thousands died are now overgrown. Tourists visit Shuri Castle, rebuilt in 1992, and peace memorials honor all who fell. The Cornerstone Monument lists 234,183 names, including Japanese, American, and Okinawan civilians. Elderly veterans sometimes return American soldiers who fought, Japanese survivors who hid, walking the same ground where they once tried to kill each other. They stand at memorials and remember friends who did not survive. Most do not speak of their experiences, words cannot capture what they witnessed. Some caves remain sealed, containing unrecovered bodies. Engineers during the battle estimated thousands of Japanese soldiers were entombed in collapsed tunnels beneath tons of rock and soil. Artifacts, rifles, helmets, and bones occasionally emerge. The island continues to reveal its dead decades later. At the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, exhibits document flame tank operations. A Mark II portable flamethrower is displayed, seemingly innocuous, a metal backpack with tanks and tubes. Visitors read that it could project fire 40 feet but often do not grasp the lethality until viewing photographs of its use at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Preserved examples of the POAWSH-1 and POAWSH-5 stand as monuments to UNMAX team's achievements. Young soldiers walk past en route to classes, rarely pausing to reflect. The Japanese Self-Defense Force does not employ flamethrowers.